Hi everyone, it is time to set up your simulator so that you can get the most out of the Navigraph Academy training courses. I'll be giving you instructions and advice on not only how to configure the controls on your devices, but also what realism settings you should turn on and off to achieve the best training results. This video is adapted to the older simulator MSFS 2020. While most settings are similar across MSFS 2020 and the new iteration MSFS 2024, some differences do exist. If you're using the latest simulator, head over to our dedicated video for that visible on the screen here or via the link in the description. Let's begin with the control settings. So at Navigraph Academy, we've been careful to pick out the right control bindings to ensure not only the most realistic but also the most effortless flight training experience within the sim. And on top of that, we have also selected the best viewing options for the cockpit camera views to ensure that you can fly following the real-life visual pitch attitudes, while also having access to instruments, aircraft systems, and outside views. First of all, Navigraph Academy is designed to be used with any type of sim setup, be it a large home cockpit like this, or just a basic setup with a simple hand controller like this. The only requirement is that you use some sort of control device, often referred to as a peripheral, where a handheld controller device such as an Xbox controller can be seen as a minimum requirement. I won't suggest exact buttons to map on each of the different controllers here, but on the Academy website you'll find examples on control mappings for the most common peripherals on the market. You can also use this video as a reference for which keybinds are essential and then bind these to the buttons of your choice. Just follow along inside the sim and update your settings as we proceed. Also be aware that the control bindings discussed in this video are the ones required to engage with our initial flight training stages with the Cessna 172, such as the 0 to solo phase of the virtual private pilot license course. We'll introduce more keybinds as we progress through our courses. Such bindings will be introduced with the new learning points, and you'll naturally come to understand their function as we go along and learn new things about flying operations. Let's begin by setting up some access. You can access the control setup menu from here. First off, let's bind our elevator, aileron, and rudder axis. These controls will allow pitch, roll, and yaw control. First, find the elevator axis setting and bind this to the pitch control axis on your control device, such as the forward-aft movement on a joystick, yoke, or the thumbstick on a controller. Then find the aileron axis and bind this to the roll axis, such as the left-right movement on a joystick, a yoke, or on a thumbstick. The last of the three primary control axes is the rudder axis setting, and this is the trickiest one to cover, as different types of control devices have different solutions to control the rudder. If you own a pair of rudder pedals, they will of course be the perfect rudder control device, and they can be matched with any other type of control device too, such as joysticks, yokes, or even gamepads. If you're instead flying with only a joystick, often the joystick itself can twist left or right, which can be used as the rudder axis instead of the rudder pedals. If you own a yoke, usually you must complement the yoke with a pair of rudder pedals. If you're using an Xbox controller or similar, often the trigger buttons work on an axis, and they can then be used to bind the rudder input to yaw to the left and to the right. Note that some yokes also provide similar buttons on each side, and these can also be used as a rudder pedal substitute. When you're done setting up your primary flight controls, let's consider the two remaining axis-bound setting that we recommend you use: the throttle and the brakes axis. The throttle enables you to set the power output of the engine. Managing specific power settings is an essential part of your flight training, and just like in real life, detailed control is important. The best way to achieve such control is to use a slider on your control device and bind it to the throttle axis setting. On most joysticks, a simple throttle control slider is usually fitted like this. You may also have a separate throttle control device or a throttle quadrant attached to the yoke fitted with several sliders. Some yokes do not have a separate throttle control slider and must be complemented with a throttle quadrant or some other throttle control device. The same thing is true for most handheld controllers, as they usually don't feature any programmable sliders. If you don't have a slider to bind to your throttle axis, you can substitute this with binding specific buttons to the keybinds to increase throttle and to decrease it. These are shown here. The downside of using buttons instead of sliders is that you lose tactile feedback. That is the instant understanding you get from physically feeling the control slider placed in a specific position. Just keep all of this in mind when you proceed with your training. Now let's move on to the brakes. So the brakes on the real-life Cessna are split so that the left pedal controls the left brake and the right pedal controls the right brake. In MSFS you'll find separate axis control settings for the left and the right brake axis. Preferably braking should be done by using the toe brakes on rudder pedals as shown here. If you do not own a pair of rudder pedals, then you can use the trigger buttons on either a gamepad or on specific yokes fitted with such trigger buttons to control the brakes. However, if the trigger buttons are used to control the rudder as well, consider binding a button that needs to be held down first in order to activate the brakes, like this. If you don't use a button in combination with the brake axis, you won't be able to steer the aircraft on the ground using the rudder and nose wheel without also simultaneously applying the brakes. This will create a lot of problems, especially on takeoff and while performing touch and goes. Here's how a corresponding conditional key binding would look like. Two final notes on brakes. If you only have a single slider, you can bind both brake axes to the same slider. This will allow you to apply even braking after landing or on parking. But differential braking will become unavailable. And lastly, if you lack a slider altogether, you can use the brakes keybind, as shown here, and bind it to a button on your control device. With this button, you can now apply full braking and stop the aircraft. The downside though is that you will always apply full braking, which at times, such as landing on a long runway, may be a little bit excessive. You could also consider binding the left brake and right brake to two different buttons. But remember that applying full differential braking may induce strong turning tendencies. Because of this, we don't recommend using these separate full braking keybinds. Alright, so now we've set all our axes and it's time to focus on buttons and keybinds. The Cessna is a very robust yet simple aircraft. To make use of our initial training courses, all the way through the traffic pattern training up to navigation flights, there will only be a few key bindings that you need to set. Our first keybind concerns the trim wheel. To fly accurately, you'll need to trim the aircraft to achieve stable flight attitudes, and we'll do this using the trim wheel. There is one setting for elevator trim up commands causing nose up movements, and one for elevator trim down commands causing nose down movements. It would be advisable to have these controls bound to your control device in a position where you can easily reach them during maneuvering. It is very important that you can control your elevator while simultaneously trimming. For example, if you're using a gamepad and have the pitch control bound to the left thumbstick, you must be able to trim with your right hand. The same thing is true for any other control device. In some lessons we'll use the Cessna flaps, and these high lift devices decrease the aircraft's lowest achievable airspeed. And you'll learn much more about this later in our virtual private pilot license course. In the real plane, flaps are set at either 0, 10, 20 or 30 degrees, and there are multiple ways to achieve this in the simulator. To extend the flaps accurately, bind the following key to an appropriate button on your control device or keyboard. As you can see, there are distinct buttons for each flap position. We recommend using unique buttons for all of the flap settings, as this will help you easily see which flap angle you're selecting. You may use the increase flap and decrease flap keybinds instead, but using these could lead to confusion if you find yourself unsure which your current flap setting is. On some control devices such as this one, distinct flap setting can be set on a slider. You can then use the flap axis option instead. Let's now move into controlling the camera viewpoint in the cockpit. So in Navigraph Academy, we will be using the virtual cockpit for all our flight training. and there will be no external camera use. Just like in real life, we'll learn to control the plane from the left seat with the cockpit environment around us, flying mostly visually by looking out the window. The Academy instructors have curated the viewpoints that you should use, and all of these have been decided following careful testing. There are several reasons for using these specific viewpoints, and I'll just quickly touch upon these so that you can understand the importance of using the same settings in your sim. In real-life flight training, the eye position is actually very important to pilots, and being seated at the correct height allows the best view of the cockpit and the external environment. In smaller planes like the Cessna, instructors go to great lengths to allow students to achieve the same eye level, as it promotes accurate handling. Even in airliners, it's common to use a device such as this to make sure that the eye level is the same for all, enabling safe transitions between instrument flying and visual maneuvering. In flight training, eye level is important because we will use visual nose attitudes to control our pitch. To follow along in our instructions, you'll benefit greatly from using the same view settings as shown in the training segments. So this is the Navigraph Academy standard view. This view setting offers both realism and convenience, as it mimics the real-life eye position, gives a wide visual view, and allows the essential instruments to be read at the bottom of the screen. Please use the settings shown on the screen here, and make sure you set your simulator the same way from within the camera options menu. These settings result in the so-called standard view. But naturally, in many cases you'll want to zoom in on the instruments or access switches within the cockpit, and for this we have prepared 4 specific views that have corresponding key bindings within the sim. We will go through each of these now, and you should consider binding all these viewpoints to specific and accessible buttons on your control device, as you will be switching in and out of them often while maneuvering. So the first is the stretch back view, and in this view you will achieve a better over the nose cowling view, which is useful when we're trying to look ahead in a climb. The keybind for this stretch back view is available via the following control setting. The second view is the zoomed standard view, and in this view we lean forward towards the instruments, and the top half of the screens become more visible. This is very useful for scanning instruments in more detail, such as checking the heading indicator and making sure our instruments are looking good. The keybind for this view is achieved by the following control binding. Keep in mind though that this name is a misnomer, as it's used for many things not related to instrument flying. Our third view is the zoomed instrument view. As you can see here, we are focused on the instruments alone, and almost nothing of the outside is actually visible. This is of course a serious disadvantage in visual flying, though we will use this view occasionally and just for short periods of time to have a detailed look at the instruments and to manipulate some switches. This zoomed instrument view is available via the following keybind. Our fourth and final view is the cockpit view. Here we are given an overview of the entire cockpit environment, and from here we can manipulate most of the switches and knobs. This view is primarily used to perform checklists. Here is the associated keybind setting. So in summary, we have 4 specific views that each have specific purposes. We'll also refer to these by their names at various points in the training courses. Make sure you bind these and make use of them during your flight training. Note that to regain the standard view, you would deselect the currently used viewpoint by clicking the same button again. The absence of any view provides the standard view. If your standard view for any reason becomes out of alignment, for example by free looking around in the cockpit, translating the view, or by zooming, then you can reset the viewpoint by using the shown key binding. This will return the view to the standard view settings that we showed earlier. And finally, you should set up your quick view buttons. These will allow you to quickly perform visual checks around the plane, and they are especially useful while flying in the traffic pattern or on navigation flights. We suggest you use at least these 3 quick view keybinds, covering left views, right views, and a view directly behind the plane. You'd also benefit from adding these two over-the-shoulder quick view buttons as well. Many control devices have a hat switch, which can be used to access the quick view settings. On a gamepad, the D-pad can often be used to control at least the 3 basic quick view settings. A final but important note regarding the left and right quick views. Using these together with the standard view offers a raised viewpoint, where much of the external view is blocked by the aircraft structure. To lower the camera view achieved by the quick view buttons, you can subsequently click the keybind used to access the zoomed instrument view. This lowered view is great for looking out the runway during traffic pattern exercises or when looking for other traffic before turns. And that concludes the control bindings guide. Note that in Navigraph Academy, we'll be using the virtual cockpit to manipulate buttons, switches, and knobs, so there is no need to bind anything further than this. Though if you do choose to bind some of the keybinds controlling the cockpit environment, just remember that you may lose some of the learning effect that is gained by otherwise using and looking at the Cessna's replicated cockpit environment. We have a final note on control sensitivities. So these settings control how the input on your control device transfers to the movement of the control surfaces on the plane. So in real-life flying, we often have more accurate control over our yoke and pedals than we usually get from the simulator control devices. In the real plane, the range of travel is often greater, but the aerodynamic feedback also provides dynamic stiffness to the controls. At Navigraph Academy, we've endeavored to use our combined experience operating the real Cessna to create realistic and more functional control sensitivity settings. Now we suggest that you use the following settings. The aileron and the rudder benefit from a reduced positive and negative sensitivity. This reduced sensitivity near the mid-range of the range of device travel allows more precise roll and yaw control, while still allowing for maximum deflection if necessary. Note that in real-life flying operations, full control deflections are actually quite rare, and we are mostly operating in the mid-range of possible control device travel distance. With these settings, you will have more accurate control and suffer fewer overreactions as you apply the more common moderate roll and yaw inputs. In our opinion, there is no need to change the sensitivities for the elevator axis. Keep in mind though that if your device has a small range of pitch movement, a similar control sensitivity setting may be beneficial for the elevator as well. Let's now move into the final setup phase, covering the realism settings. So with Navigraph Academy, we are striving to create courses which offer unparalleled flight training realism, while still maintaining adaptability to fit the mix of home sim setups that exist out there. Overall, the realism settings covered here can be used together with most setups and are to a large extent the most realistic options available. Let's first have a look at the assistance options menu in MSFS 2020 as shown here. With aircraft systems, you can simply select hard as the option, and all proper settings will be pre-selected. When it comes to failures and damages, we suggest putting all settings to disabled, which is done by selecting easy as the category setting. The damage model may sometimes create unrealistic issues, such as detecting crashes on normal takeoffs and landings. This would lead to an abrupt end to an otherwise trouble-free flight. The navigation aids and notification categories can both be set to hard, which will disable all on-screen assistance. Under piloting, you may select hard as a category option. This will disable artificial help with the core teaching point of our initial courses, such as landings, yaw control, and trim. However, if you do not own a pair of rudder pedals, we suggest you turn on the auto rudder function. You can learn more about our auto rudder philosophy in the first lesson of the virtual PPL course. And you can access this by clicking on the video shown now. Under points of interest, select the category to the hard setting. This will disable all markers for airports, landmarks, and similar labels. And under user experience, you may decide which options fit your experience the best. However, we suggest that you turn the ADC voices off, as they may be distracting and often unrealistic as well. As for the options showing VFR maps, nav logs and checklists at startup, you should deselect all of these, as we'll be using the Navigraph systems, charts and tools during our courses. And there we are, your simulator is fully set up and ready for flight training with us. Again, be aware that this video has covered the sim setup for MSFS 2020, and if you're using the newer simulator, head over to the dedicated 2024 video on our channel. And finally, note that we offer a comprehensive setup guide on our Academy website. There you'll find all the key bindings, control sensitivities and realism settings that we have covered here in an easy to digest format. See you over there for more information on both simulators.
Are you ready to start your flight training with Navigraph Academy? Using these control and realism settings, you are well on your way to becoming a professional virtual pilot. And you can start your flight training right now by accessing the first lesson in the virtual private pilot license course over on the Navigraph Academy website. The first lesson is focused on the effect of the controls. In that video and in the accompanying in-game lesson, you will learn to manipulate the controls effectively and professionally. While doing so, you also have the chance to test the control sensitivities and some of the keybinds that we have set up in this video. It's time to go flying. See you up there.